Hey everybody, good morning and welcome to the 13th Annual Growing Online Learning Conference presented by the Illinois Community Colleges Online. The theme for the 2021 conference is Teaching, Learning, and Caring. We hope that this year's conference, as we continue with teaching and learning, is in challenging times, My name's Lori Wendt, and I'm from Parkland College in Champaign. And ILCO would like to thank Heartland Community College for providing the web conferencing platform for use in this year's conference. Please note that captioning is available for the conference sessions. There we go. Our schedule, briefly, for the 3 days is shown here in this slide. It can also be found at the conference website at ilcco.net under Resources and Events. The links to attend the live sessions can also be found on the conference website and your registration confirmation email. And if you have any questions on accessing the sessions, please contact Jeff Newell at jeff.newell, N-E-W-E-L-L, at illinois.gov. Recordings of these sessions and handouts will be available on the conference site at ilco.net following the conference. And now I have to switch my devices up. When you're sharing your screen, you lose access to everything. ILCO is pleased to welcome Susan Nugent. Susan has been the online support and instructional technology specialist at Lakeland College since 2004. Over the years, Susan has seen a lot of changes to online learning, but this pandemic has brought online learning to the forefront that shows how critically important quality online learning is for students. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Susan.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Let me pull up my PowerPoint so we'll get started. Good presentation mode here. All right, so this is probably what we think of a lot of our students. They're probably in bed watching our lecture. So Zoom fatigue is really something that everybody's dealing with. And the problem is not only are we using it for online learning, but people are using it to meet up with their family members. They're having birthday parties over Zoom or any other kind of gathering. So that fatigue of being always on in Zoom is something that is very real and something that we have to consider with our online learning. So I do want to point out that at Lakeland College, we are using Zoom. So this presentation will be a little bit Zoom-centric, but everything that I'm going to talk about today is totally possible in all the other webinar platforms. So don't feel like, oh, I can't do that, because it's totally possible in all of the other platforms, at least the ones that I explored. And I do have some resources that will be available, and I'll give you that link at the end of the presentation. It's also going to be on the conference website as well. All right, so the first thing we're going to start out with is when you're leading a Zoom session, your enthusiasm is infectious. So having that right mindset is critically important when you're lecturing to students. So that is something that you really want to consider And I kind of struggled with this presentation early on, and I invited several of the faculty tech team members to kind of give me an idea of what they were facing. And this is where I'm bringing in our special guest, Andrea Bright. She's an academic counselor here at Lakeland College. And her responses to my questions were just so helpful that I thought it would be a really good idea just to quickly go over the questions I asked her and to have her respond to those in real time here. So welcome, Andrea.
Hi, everybody. Good morning.
So the first question I asked you was, how have your meetings changed since we started this back in March?
It's changed quite a bit. Back in March, I really just needed them to get through what we had left to finish, right? All of a sudden, we're in person now, we're all separate and didn't plan for it. So what we did to help manage that was I just went ahead and grouped what we had left into two main parts and then the final. And that worked fine for us all to survive and get through that. For summer and fall, I had more time to prepare. Thankfully, I had recorded some lectures from when we were in person, and I used those that I had to go ahead and create some PowerPoint shows. So in case something would happen to me or I needed, to be away from class, I still had something I could give them that would simulate that experience. For spring, had even more time, and I wanted to go ahead and update my class to the institutional template that Sue's created for us. To try to make all the courses more the same for students to make it easier for them to get through it. I kind of overestimated how much I could get done in the amount of time there was. So part of it is in the new format and part of it's not. And for me, that's a little bit disappointing, but for the students, they probably don't know much about that. So that's how it's really changed coming from March to now. Is it's much more organized. I'm more prepared. Hopefully it's all laid out for them as best as it can be for the entire semester on day one. And that's my goal.
Yeah, so, and that kind of leads into the previous session that we did yesterday with Kona Jones, and having that course really arranged in a way that makes sense for students. One of the things you did point out in that question was that you played music ahead of the session, and that really helped change the mood of your Zoom sessions.
It did. Silence is unnerving to me, and I'm sure it is for some of the students too. The first time you go into that class and it's silent, and maybe I'm there live, or maybe there's just photos and the black boxes with the names. It's kind of intimidating for everyone, I think. So I started playing music and using the chat feature before class started. So when we're in person, we have about 10 minutes between classes. So I try to get in between around 5 to 7 minutes before it would start, and start the music. And then when they start coming in, use the chat box to talk to them and see how they're doing. Just kind of break the ice that way. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, and you've already kind of gone over some of the things in that second question about the improvements you've made. So what is some of the feedback that you've got from students?
Yeah, so I was really curious how it was for them. So I started asking last semester what they wanted. What did they like and what didn't they like, and what can we do? And really it was a combination of formats to present. So they really liked the live lectures, pre-recorded lectures, having some group time, some social moments. I really love TV, so just to kind of have that, social moment that some of us are not getting, make sure I build that in. Question and answer time, reviews and explanatory sessions. Of course, all of that's during scheduled class time, but then I do offer them plenty of optional, like one-on-one appointments that we can book through Calendly, which is a nice calendar scheduling service. And that way they can see, and I can show them hands-on, and they're not afraid to ask questions if it's just us. I want them to speak during class, but We're all still adjusting to being on video, I think. So if they don't want to talk in class, they can do those one-on-ones where I can physically show them on the screen where to go and what to do. And that helps a lot.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of go over what we did earlier. So let's give Andrea a really round of applause for sharing her experiences.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, so the next thing, when it comes to our live sessions that we're going to do with students, it's really important in your LMS that you're providing students with the necessary information that they're going to need to get to your meeting. So in the case for Lakeland, we do have the integration with Zoom directly in Canvas, and that is actually a huge time saver. So if that's not something that's occurring at your institution, check with your IT department and see if that's something that they can, make easier for you. The integration makes it much more easier to create those meetings. You don't have to worry about if students are seeing them because with the Zoom integration in Canvas, it automatically creates the calendar event for you and it automatically sends the notification to your students for you. And then if you do the cloud recordings are right there in that Zoom integration. So you have a great way of directing students towards all that information that they need to get to your meetings and also to see those recordings after the fact as well. So the next thing is in your lectures, it's really easy to get into your lecture and just lecture for the entire hour. The problem with that is a lot of times, especially in a Zoom session, people are going to zone out. They're not going to be with you that entire time. So if you break it up to where you're not lecturing the entire hour, break it up so that you're encouraging students to participate in your meeting. Maybe you ask questions and then you have them respond, or you call on a student so that they're aware that they're going to need to participate in the meeting. This is one way that you can encourage that in participation. All right, so this one is, this has become a dilemma. And it's actually a very, especially when I see it on Twitter, it's a very hotly contested situation that a lot of instructors struggle with. And, it's really easy for students to just turn that camera off. And the problem for a faculty member with the cameras off is that you just see a bunch of boxes, basically. And you don't have that human connection with your students. So it's very difficult to teach to a bunch of black boxes, but on the other hand, students do have valid reasons for turning that camera off. So as these are listed here, you've got the anxiety and stress, that always on feeling when you've got the camera on. A lot of students are facing competing obligations. The pandemic has caused a lot of issues. Students may be facing job loss, and they're also trying to participate in their kids' Zoom sessions for their kids' school, or they've got a new job and their schedule has changed, or there's just so many things that have really changed people's schedules over this past year. Privacy is another one. Some students don't want to show their camera because they don't want to show where they're living, or they just don't want to invade that privacy. And then, of course, the last one is probably the biggest one is bandwidth and internet speed. Sometimes your internet is just not good enough to be able to show that camera. If the student turns the camera off, they'll at least be able to participate and talk. So sometimes you do need to turn that camera off. So some of the solutions to this dilemma is for you to establish a clear expectation of what you expect from your students right from the beginning. You know, let them know what you expect them to do in an online meeting. And then also encouragement. If you're sharing your camera and you're encouraging them to do that rather than using penalties, that's going to work better. Penalties typically don't work, and it just makes students more resentful about doing that. Some of the other things is, again, encouraging the students into that conversation. So breaking up your lecture so that students are able to ask questions, or maybe you just, instead of lecturing, just have an entire conversation about whatever topic is today. And then if they can't share their screen, encourage them to add a photo. If they add a photo, you at least get to see their picture while you're lecturing so that it's not just a black box. And that helps too, because now you at least have a face to connect to that student. And then another thing that you can do if they are worried about the privacy issue of you being able to see where they're living, you can encourage them to change their background. So this is something that you can do in almost all of the platforms that I looked at. And what that does is it basically green screens them with whatever background picture they choose, so that you see the background picture behind them. You can also do ready handmade things. I do have a video on the resource site where a teacher actually set up, she actually used a portable clothing hanger to make a background. In this case, I kind of redecorated with lights. So, I mean, you can do just about anything to make your background a little more pleasing. And students can do the same as well. And then the last thing is just don't expect perfection. It's just not going to happen. Don't expect it from your students, and don't expect it from yourself as well. That kind of leads back again to the previous presentations where we talked about the stress that everyone's dealing with, and it's just, you can't expect perfection. So obviously screen sharing is a great way to get students engaged into your presentation. Instead of you just being a talking head on the screen, if you screen share a presentation or maybe your course site and do a demo and explain something to them of what maybe a project that they need to do, if you do that, it's going to be more interesting to them and they're going to maybe even participate more. One of the things that is available when you screen share is the annotations tool. And when you screen share as a presenter, this will show up here where you have the annotations. And you can set it to where you can allow all students to do that. So you can actually annotate. And it is available here. So this screen just shows you all of your security settings that you would see. And so you can even allow students to share their screen. Obviously, we have the chat window, and that's a really important one. And then the annotate, you can turn that on so that everyone can do that as well. And we could try that. It looks like we do have the annotation tools. So on the next slide, let's see if we can actually do this. I was just checking out the comments here. So, yep, cool. Yep, somebody's mentioning about using the check mark. That is a feature of Zoom. It's actually under the participant list. That is a great thing to do as well. Brainstorming ideas, that's a great idea too. Oops. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your ideas here. And this tool would actually be really useful in, for example, a math class. Oops. If you're on the phone, I'm not sure what would happen when you're on the phone, if that's possible. I haven't tried that one yet. Yeah, the instructor having not the camera on but talking the entire time. Yeah, I mean, you could do that, but if you're screen sharing, your video is probably not as important if you're screen sharing at the time. Cool. Well, this is great. So you guys have showed a lot of different ways that you can use the annotation tools. Also, some of the other things that you can do in your online sessions. So great. Thank you for all of your annotations. All right. So I'm going to go ahead, see if we can remove the annotations now. There we go. Okay, so the next thing that we're looking at is asking feedback from our students. So this could happen in a number of different ways. The chat is a great one. Have that chat window. Encourage students to use the chat. So while you're lecturing, they can ask questions and you can answer them in real time, just like what we're doing today. Another thing that you can do is poll. All of the webinar platforms have the poll feature. And if you didn't want to use the poll feature that's in the webinar platform, you could use something like Poll Everywhere. And that would be another way that you could do quick polls to your students. And then the way that you would add polls is in Zoom. It's actually easier if you go directly into your Zoom account. You can do it through the Canvas integration, and I don't know how it would work in other learning platforms, but I've found that it's easier just to go directly to Zoom and create those. In Zoom, you have to create them ahead of time. So you have to create them before your meeting. And you would just go in there and add a poll to the meeting, and you can put your question in there and all of your answers. So that's a great way to get feedback from your students. So then the next thing that we're going to look at is breakout rooms. So basically what breakout rooms are is a way to divide your students into smaller groups. So there's a lot of different reasons why you might want to do this, but that capability is available in all of the platforms. And basically what the technology allows you to do is you have your main meeting room, and then when you divide the students into these breakout rooms, they actually have their own little meeting together with that little group of people that you've arranged them in. And then they can do an activity in that breakout room and then come back to the main room after the breakout room. You give them a limited amount of time to do it. So breakout rooms is a great way to get students engaged in your online sessions. So this is an example of how to set up those breakout rooms in a Zoom session. I'm sure it's pretty similar in all the other platforms, but basically you select the breakout room option. It brings up this little dialog box first where you decide how many rooms you're going to create, whether or not you're going to add the students automatically or manually, and then how many participants are going to be in each room. Once you've got the breakout rooms created, now if you chose the manual option, you would need to assign people into those breakout rooms. And then you can also, you have some options here as well. So you can decide how long people are going to be in the breakout room. You can also give them a countdown to let them know when it's going to end. And then as soon as it ends, they're all brought back into the main session again. So what are some activities that you can do in breakout rooms? So that's probably the next hurdle, is trying to figure out, well, how do I use the breakout room? What things am I going to have the students actually do? Because if you don't have a good activity for them to do, then it's kind of an awkward activity. So think about your content and also how you might use that breakout room to encourage that student engagement. So I found this PDF that was from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and it had some really great activity ideas, so I encourage you to check that out. But they were all broken down into these 6 categories. So think about your activity and what your objective for your students is for that breakout room. So we could do icebreakers. We could encourage students to improve their communication skills. We can have a problem solve. That's probably one of the most common. If you, for example, a math class, you have them work on a problem together, for example. Creativity, brainstorming, we kind of already talked about that one with the annotations, is having a brainstorm session to get students engaged in whatever topic we're talking about. And then also it helps to build confidence. So one of the things that breakout rooms do is basically people are thrown into, yes, I need to participate in this now. So it does build that confidence. And then also it's a great way, especially if you're lecturing for the entire session, it's a great way to break out and just have a brain break. So you can do some fun activities in there as well. So here's an example of one of the activities that was in that PDF. So this is a brain teaser activity. So this would be a nice brain break type of activity. Basically, you would just organize your students into groups that there would at least be 3 people in, and you would have one person in that group be the one that turns their camera on, and then they turn it back off, and then they change their look a little bit. So when they come back on, then everybody has to figure out what they changed. So it's just a nice brain break. If, for example, you do need to lecture the entire time, you could set an intermission where they actually do this activity and then they come back. So that way you're breaking up your lectures so that they're not spending the entire time listening to you. I actually pulled this one in today, and because I thought that this one actually fit with what we were talking about all this week. So this one is more of a reflection type of activity, and it's just a way for people to kind of go over what they learned that day. And what's really nice is it just has some really simple questions that the participants in the breakout room could actually do or answer in that session, and they could kind of talk with each other about that. So on the next slide is all of those activities. And depending on the time, how are we doing on time?
It's
Well, we're really
10:30.
out of time. Yeah.
We're out of time. Okay.
But if you want to take 5 minutes, that's fine.
Well, I'll go ahead and just leave it at that if we're out of time, because I do want to answer questions. So let me look at the chat again. Let me look at the chat.
Yeah, I think Andrea's been doing a pretty good job of keeping up with a lot of the questions. Thank you, Andrea.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and for some reason, I'm not able to pull the chat up. Are there any other questions?
I don't think so. Like I said, I think Andrea caught most of them, and then I think you caught several of them when we were playing on the screen. Does anybody have any other questions?
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
Just want to remind everybody that we have another session this afternoon at 2 o'clock, Active Learning Through Service Projects in a Digital Learning Environment by Mary Carlson. And we do want to thank both Susan and Andrea for their time today. This was great information. I'm kind of sorry to see it end. I thought that we were going to get to go on for another half an hour. So my apologies for not giving you your 5-minute warning. But this is really interesting. It's a good topic.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everyone.
I guess if we don't have any other questions, be sure to look for the materials on the website, and we'll see everybody this afternoon.
Thank you.
Stay warm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll be back.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.